if you've saved 800,000 or maybe $1 million, maybe even $1.5 million or more, and yet you still feel like you're behind for retirement, you may not be behind. You may just be measuring readiness the wrong way. I regularly sit across from responsible, disciplined savers that have done everything right. I mean, they build substantial balances, they avoided major mistakes, they live below their means, and yet as retirement gets closer, the dominant feeling isn't confidence, it's uncertainty. And it's not because they don't have enough. It's really because they've never seen how their money actually functions in retirement. And when you haven't seen the full plan in motion, the safest answer always just kind of feels like, well, I guess I'll just go ahead and keep working. So today I'm going to walk you through 4 types of high savers that believe they're behind, but they aren't. And if you recognize yourself in one of them, it may completely change how you think about your timeline. If we haven't met, by the way, I'm Ryan Kravitz. I'm a financial planner, and I help people transition from accumulating wealth to turning it into reliable income that they can confidently live on. So let's go ahead and start with the first type. So this is the quietly comfortable. So this is someone that has maybe 800,000 to 1.5 million saved. They got a paid off home or close to it. They have no major debt. They got a reasonable lifestyle. They don't feel wealthy. They're not flashy, but they compare themselves constantly. Friends who retired earlier, colleagues with larger portfolios, neighbors who seem further ahead. And so they just assume that they're behind. But here's what changes when we stop looking at the number and start looking at design. So first we separate the essential expenses from discretionary ones. What absolutely must be funded every month? Things like housing and insurance and food and healthcare and utilities. And that number is frequently lower than most people assume. Then we layer in Social Security. And, at the federal level, it's tax advantaged income, and most states don't tax it at all. And for many households, that guaranteed income covers a substantial portion of essential expenses, which means then that the portfolio is not funding 100% of retirement. As we know, it's supplementing a defined income plan. And when you move from, okay, the portfolio has to fund everything because it's always about the number. How much do I have? How much have I accumulated? And instead start thinking about it in terms of, okay, well, the portfolio supports this coordinated strategy. The risk profile, it changes dramatically. I mean, then we stress test it. We look at things like what happens if markets decline early in retirement. What if inflation runs higher for several years? What if healthcare costs increase later on? Under conservative assumptions, many of these households are not fragile. They're stable. The stress wasn't coming from math. It was coming from comparison. Now, this next category, this is the late stage compounder. So this person's usually in their early 60s. They're still working. They're still contributing, maybe sitting at 1.1 million or maybe 1.3 million. And they feel like time is just running out. I mean, they see today's balance and just kind of assume that that's the final snapshot. But really, the final 5 to 7 years before retirement can materially change outcomes. And it's not because you suddenly take more risk. And it's not because you chase higher returns. It's because compounding now is finally operating on a meaningful basis. I mean, if you think about it, a reasonable return on, let's say, 1.2 million behaves very differently than the same return on $400,000. When we model conservative growth and continued contributions, and also a realistic retirement timeline, then the projection at, let's say, age 64 or age 67, it looks materially different than the snapshot at 61. Without that modeling, though, fear fills the gap. And that fear then defaults to one more year. And sometimes one more year then quietly becomes 3 or 4. Now, of course, the younger years of retirement, these are the healthiest and most energetic years of retirement. And none of us will get those years back. I mean, really, this is where measuring the wrong thing quietly costs time. All right, now let's talk about the third category here. So this is the financial underspender. So strong savings, million and a half, sometimes 2 million or more. Disciplined investing, thoughtful planning, but emotionally still operating from accumulation mode. And they spent decades, building up their wealth. And now psychologically, it's hard now to make that shift to building up all these assets to now drawing down. And so they spend far below what their plan can safely support. I mean, they delay travel, they delay helping family, they delay experiences they've been talking about doing for years. They just can't pull the trigger. And it's not because they need more money. It's just because they don't trust the setup. When we stress test downturn scenarios and inflation and longevity and tax efficiency, I mean, the plan shows resilience, not perfection, but certainly resilience. For some retirees, the greatest financial risk isn't running out of money. It's underliving the healthiest decade of retirement. Those early retirement years, when your energy and your freedom intersect, these are uniquely valuable they don't come back. All right, now let's talk about category 4, which is the income advantage saver. So this is someone who might only have, $800,000 saved and they feel exposed. But they also have strong Social Security and maybe a pension and maybe rental income. And if guaranteed income covers 70 to 80% of essential expenses, then something important happens. The sequence of returns risk drops significantly. Withdrawals are smaller, relatively speaking, to the portfolio, and volatility doesn't then dictate survival. And lifestyle stability is not entirely then dependent on the markets. If you had tried to recreate the guaranteed income using investments alone, then the implied portfolio value would be surprisingly high. But the thing is that those income streams don't show up as a lump sum on a statement, so oftentimes people discount them. But again, the account balance doesn't tell the whole story. Really, income durability does, especially in retirement. You might see yourself in more than one of these categories. I mean, that's normal. The goal isn't to label yourself. It's really just to move from vague anxiety of, I don't know if I've done enough, to having that real clarity where you feel like, okay, yeah, here's how my retirement income system actually works. And you feel like you have that confidence. Retirement readiness really isn't defined just by hitting some bigger number. It's defined by understanding, okay, what your lifestyle actually requires, what guaranteed income provides, how taxes affect withdrawals, how investment risk interacts with timing, and really how all of that behaves across, decades to come. And when those pieces are aligned, the picture looks very different than it does when you're just kind of staring at a single account balance. And it's not because your money has changed, but because your measurement has changed. If you saw yourself in one of these types and you're wondering whether you're actually behind, that question has an answer. Not with optimism, not with guesswork, but with clear projections built on conservative assumptions and real stress testing. There's a link below if you'd like to walk through that process. Because at this stage, it's really not about chasing more. It's about understanding what you've already built and then making decisions from clarity instead of fear. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.